Okay. Kirsten, do you want to start off with the agenda items, and then we'll start to go into the report in a little bit?
Sure. So we sent the agenda in the meeting invite, which I do not have open now, of course, in front of me. So this is spectacular. I think we were going to start out by first introducing Audrey, who I suspect most of you know Audrey, but I was going to point out that Audrey is joining our group now. And our first agenda item actually was to talk about who is still on the committee, who has left us, and how we might be able to recruit a few more people. Then Scott and I were hoping that we could have a conversation about the feedback that we got from NECHE, particularly on Standard 8, because that is about assessment and evaluation. But there might be a couple of things in Standard 4 that we also want to look at, because they sort of cross-referenced the two standards in both of those sections. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about some of our assessment plans and goals for the year. And then if anybody else has anything that they want to bring up. So let's kind of start with welcoming Audrey. Yay. And then talking a little bit about how we're going to replace particularly Kim. Melba is also stepping away from the committee. She'll still be on the email chains, but I think most of you know that she's also working on her dissertation right now. And so she's trying to sort of reduce the number of standing committees and things like that that she's actively involved in. So we're not really like losing Melba, but she's probably not going to be at all of our meetings. So we might want to consider that. And Scott, is there somebody else that I'm forgetting about? You're on mute.
I figured I knew how to use this by now. It's almost been 2 years. So I talked to Rick today. He's obviously retired, and he's going to be doing a lot more CIT work. So he's not going to be part of the committee anymore. So we'll need to fill that in as well.
Okay.
And Jennifer has just jumped on with us as well.
Oh, great.
So I agree. We do need more members and more representation around the college. And that brings us to a point that I've mentioned a few times to the academic affairs members of this committee. I truly believe that we need this committee with two subcommittees dividing up the academic affairs and student affairs. But as a bulk, we come together and we communicate on how best we support each other with regards to assessment. So I think that with Jennifer on the call and Aubrey's kind of all over the place at the college with different hats, I think that it's important that we may want to bring on some more student affairs members so that we can capture as much as we possibly can for our students. Does anybody have any ideas, people that we can recruit?
Or even just kind of in general perspectives or voices that we think we might not be hearing right now. So we can start to send some emails.
Hi everybody. Can I ask for some clarification? Are we starting to, I'm unfamiliar with assessment efforts in student affairs. So can we talk about, just sort of fill me in a little bit? Are we bringing in student affairs assessment into the learning assessment, or is the learning assessment one group and student affairs assessment is another group, and we're all in an assessment group umbrella? Yeah,
I think that in my opinion, I think that we need a committee called the assessment committee. And that's what we would be sitting in right now. And then there'd be two subcommittees on student affairs, assessment of student affairs, and assessment of student learning. So that way that there's two committees, because under NECHE, we really need to expand our assessment across the board. It's not just limited to both student affairs and academic affairs. There's other areas of the college that we need to capture. But I
Yeah.
think that because since we're so closely related, I think in a lot of the work and support that academic affairs receives comes from student affairs. So I think that in a way of capturing both, I think that we do need to expand this committee that encompasses both, and then have the two subcommittees that would hone in or look at more granular work.
I do, Amy, I appreciate you asking that question because I have had a similar question and also don't have a ton of context about this team aside from being asked to be on it and all of these wonderful faces. My kind of thought there is that along with the NECHE feedback, the DHE has requested and kind of stated that we need to incorporate metrics and measurement much more in our strategic planning process. And so I guess I would say that although I really think that, yes, we need to be doing assessment in all of our units of the college, I don't know if I would have hesitation about making another committee right now when we're launching into this strategic planning process where we are inevitably going to have to create more assessment efforts too. I don't know if this is the right place. It could be, or it might be that we need to have an institutional assessment committee almost that's like not just academic and student affairs, but every unit needs to be doing assessment. And is this the forum for that? Or like, I feel like we need to hash that out as an organization. That's kind of my thought, but I don't, that's not to say that what this group is doing shouldn't be happening just if we were to tack on a student affairs half of it because we feel that student affairs needs to be doing assessment. What about like institutional advancement and like the other areas of the college, and where is that assessment happening, and is it tied to these committees too? Like I think we need to be doing this across the board. And I just know that like death by committee can happen really easily in higher ed. So I was just thinking like, since we're in the strategic planning process, would it make sense to see a little bit how that shakes out before creating another committee? I don't want to be like joining this committee and then immediately.
Right.
Well,
Like,
I'm gonna just try to give a little bit of context. The committee is about student learning outcomes.
okay.
So it's not broadly about
Got
assessment across the college. It's not designed to assess all of the different places. Do we need to do that ultimately? And is that part of what the NECHE report says? Yes, absolutely. But the charge of this group is really to look at student learning outcomes. And so the goal of including people from across the college is to think about how more than academic affairs may be responsible for student learning outcomes and for clearly stating student learning outcomes and then following through on the assessment of those. So I think, Amy, to your point, we may find that once student affairs has an opportunity to set some student learning outcomes, it doesn't actually make sense to have one big group with everybody. Like maybe we actually do just pull apart into two groups. But because student affairs has never actually been asked to have student learning outcomes in the past, we invited Jennifer and Jonathan to sit in on this group to understand how we're already doing the work in academic affairs, so that then once we kind of go through the NECHE feedback and think about what our goals are for student learning outcomes this year, then we can kind of figure out, like, is this one big committee, or do we actually need to do this separately between the two divisions, with the oversight really happening between Jennifer and Paul as opposed to at this group? Does that make a little bit more sense to everybody?
Yes, foot now. So I was just gonna say then the two things that came to mind that before Amy asked her question was Ashley Moore and like career services. And then my other thought was advising. I know they've been working on creating an advising syllabus. So I know like Michelle and Stephanie collaboratively. So if we were to incorporate, I know that career services isn't in student affairs, but those would be the two other parts of the college that I would suggest. I'm going to mute myself now.
Thank you. This is all, that was all very helpful information. I want to acknowledge that student affairs is definitely has a longstanding history of being a part of the New England Educational Assessment Association. And so it's not unusual, of course, for student affairs to be involved in assessment. I just wanted to, it just hadn't previously been part of what our assessment efforts at Northern Essex. So welcome to, Jennifer and Jonathan. But I also do want to just clarify, my understanding of student affairs assessment was that those groups were assessing their work based on their goals, but that they weren't involved in assessing student learning. Or am I incorrect in that assumption? So because Kirsten, you said that the reason they're here is because they're going to participate in assessing student learning. And I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. And that would be, to my knowledge, would be a very different direction that we would take in assessing the student learning outcomes.
Yes.
So we would have to discuss that with the faculty and department chairs and the program coordinators, I'm sure.
Right, and they wouldn't, so student affairs would not be assessing the same student learning outcomes that we assess in academic affairs. They wouldn't be assessing program outcomes. The goal would be for them to figure out if they have their own student learning outcomes that they need to be assessing. But Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of this grew out of some of the feedback we got from NECHE saying that the hope is that there will be something in student affairs that mirrors the assessment work we're doing in academic affairs.
I just, didn't we have a conversation the last time we met? I think it was with the NECHE feedback,
Yeah,
that we were going to think about the relationship, the linkage between institutional learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, and student learning outcomes.
yes,
Yes.
So I think that's what we're really talking about, but we haven't said it yet.
yes. Thank you.
Kirsten, I have two thoughts about this conversation. I think number one is really understanding the philosophy behind student learning outcomes. And so with my biased student affairs hat, I will say that learning doesn't only occur within four walls of an actual classroom. And so as you look at and think about the efforts that we put forth with ISC and all of the great work that we are going to continue to do in terms of retaining our students, there's a lot that happens with our students' journey and a lot of learning that occurs as you think about their social, cultural capital, and a whole bunch of other things that would probably not be appropriate to list in this meeting. But all of that learning also does complement the learning that occurs within the classroom. And then the second thing in terms of student affairs and our goals are very simple, and it's a thing, right? So we focus on access, retention, and recruitment, or rather enrollment, right? So as you look through just thinking about that pipeline and those three tenets, there are things that we hope our students are able to learn throughout that process. And so being able to see what that process looks like here through the academic lens, there's no need to reinvent the wheel for us. And so how do we know that our students are being retained? What is it that we're measuring? What is it that we're doing to ensure that that is happening? How do we know that our students throughout our enrollment process are learning how to, for example, locate our academic policies, right? So think about all of the transactional and transformational things that student affairs is able to do to enhance our student experience. Assessment is about that too, right? How do we know that we have reached our goal, right? And right now, at least in my short history here, I can't point to a document or history that shows that student affairs has ever engaged in this work. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to learn from the experts that are here, which are our academic colleagues, in hopes for us to be able to model the very process that you all are also going through. Also, just as a reminder, Standard 5, it's my responsibility. It's a thing. So how do we know, right? And that's what assessment helps us better understand. How do we know that we have reached I guess, our goal, to put it in simple terms. So thank you for including me, Scott, and Kirsten, and I will hush now because I want to definitely hear and continue to learn. As I speak, I don't always learn, but as I listen, I have realized that I tend to learn a whole lot more. So thank you, Kirsten. I'll mute. Like Audrey said, I'll go mute myself now.
All right, so I think some of are talking through the NECHE feedback and thinking about what our goals are for the year, and all of that might help clarify the future of including student affairs and how we can support their work and all of that. So I'm going to circle back and re-ask my original question, which was simply like, we've lost some members. Does anybody know anybody who wants to join us? And particularly anybody who might have some of the institutional knowledge that we lost by losing Kim and Rick and a couple of other people. Elle?
Well, I don't, the person I was thinking of isn't really someone who's going to bring institutional knowledge yet, but I don't even know if a vice president can be on it, but Paul had a lot to say about assessment today in a meeting I had with him.
Okay.
So I don't know if that would be appropriate, but I mean, I think he'd want to join us, even if he's maybe not on the committee. And I feel like, not that it does any good to comment on it, but it's so sad. The people we've lost, it's like we took away a huge chunk of institutional knowledge about assessment. And I feel like it all started when Suzanne left, and it's just been a sad day for the history of our assessment since then, because it's true, we lose institutional knowledge every time someone leaves, and change is awesome, but we've lost a lot of people who know a lot about some of the things we've been doing and why. So I actually have like some feelings of anxiety about that right now. I think
I would love to involve Paul, because it does sound like he's done a lot of assessment, as long as everybody's comfortable with that. It's been sort of a faculty-led group, so I want to just make sure that we don't start bringing in so many VPs that it just sort of shifts. But if everybody's like, yes, that seems like a good idea, I'll send him an email.
Typically, Bill had stepped away from, he didn't want to have anything to do with the committee because we were to report back to him. And the idea is that assessment is supposed to be faculty staff led instead of, the VPs tend to guide us in a direction, and the deans tend to guide us as well. But most of the assessment work is actually conducted by faculty and staff.
That's correct.
Yeah, I would just see Paul being here to listen, not to tell us what to do. Although, I mean, I have to admit, like, it might be nice to have some like new perspective that we haven't had in a while. So
maybe he could come for the next meeting, and then like we can decide, or maybe he won't be a long-term part of it, but I don't know. He had very different ideas about how we should be assessing core academic skills. So I felt like, oh, we should have you talk to everyone before. I don't know. It was a good meeting, but it seemed like slightly different than what we're doing. And I feel like he might have different visions or experiences that I would have him come next meeting, is what I'm saying. In a good, positive, somebody new is here and has different insights, ideas that we haven't done, at least on that committee. So I'd invite him.
sounds good to me. Anybody else?
Well, we have new faculty who will need a committee. So I don't know that necessarily that they have a background in this, but I know Kim Ling has a lot of great comments that she's making in new faculty orientation about some things she's done in the past. So I can't say that's her background, but that is someone who I think might be a good choice for this committee. She's really engaged, really excited to be here, and really interested in outcomes assessment. So that might be a good person to consider.
Okay. All right, well, then I'm just going to task everybody with keeping your ears open for anybody who sounds like they're dying to join an assessment committee over the next couple of weeks, and just, send them my way and we'll see what we can do. I do think it's important to have, as large of a group as, not a huge group, because then it becomes a little bit unwieldy, but it would be nice to replace just a few of the people we've lost, just to make sure that we have voices from all the different sort of corners of the college and particularly of academic affairs. So.
Kirsten, in addition to that, if I just may add, I would love to also see some diversity within this group as well. So not only diversity within, you know, obviously the academic programs, which is very, very important, but just diversity in lived experiences, you know, just keep listing. But if we can keep that also in mind, and I will hush.
All right, who wants to talk about the NECHE standards? Yay, but we're going to anyway. Yeah. So I was going to say, so I think, I mean, I have some things that I pulled out from standard 8, but what I'd really like, and Scott, if you want to kind of get us started and I'll take notes, I'm just really curious to hear people's sort of first reaction when you read the feedback on standard 8, what stood out to people, what questions you have, things like that.
So overall, most of you already know that I've been doing this for a few years now, working one-on-one with departments, faculty, and I knew it was coming, but it's seeing it in the report is kind of like a punch to the gut. 71% of programs have SLOs. We need 100%. 86% have effective curriculum maps. We need 100%. And when we talk about curriculum maps, as I had spoke to one of the site visitors, the curriculum maps are not just a list of your program outcomes and check marks of where those outcomes fall in courses. There is a specific, as Bill had always said to us, what's happening inside the course that these program learner outcomes are connected specifically to that course. So when we're looking at programs, not departments, we're looking at programs, we need to see what's happening in those courses and how those courses connect to specifically to the program outcomes. So the site visitor that had specifically said to me that you have a lot of this program maps for most of your programs, but I can't see what's occurring inside a course as it relates to your programs. How do I know that you're just not putting an X next to that course and that program outcome? What are the student learning outcomes at the course level that specifically relate to the program outcomes? So after that meeting, I knew that we were going to get hit on that. So I think that those are two glaring things that when I sent out the invite, and Kristen and I had discussed this, part of this process that we're in at this very moment is to identify what was listed in the report and triage it. And sometimes low-hanging fruit is the easiest way to make those quick improvements. I believe that these two items are the low-hanging fruit. These are the areas that we can get curriculum maps because faculty are using course level outcomes. So all we have to do is just utilize the curriculum map that most of the programs at the colleges are already using. And that will cover the 86% problem. And then the 71% problem is, if you read in the report, some programs have 33 outcomes. That's too much. And the reason I say it's too much is when I've worked with faculty, that's 33 outcomes you have to assess. That's ridiculous. Even if you have an outside accrediting agency that says these are the things that you need to teach, you can still teach those 33 items. You just combine them into more broader course program level outcomes. And then in your courses, you look at those 33 as a granular approach. I just feel bad for the programs that are attempting to assess 33 outcomes, and to knock to increase that number from a 71% to 100%. You just really need to speak with the faculty, the departments that are not doing this yet, and work in that direction. That's my two low hanging fruits. So I'll leave it at that for other people, the other areas. Anyone else?
Yes. I I don't like to, I'm trying to talk less on Zoom meetings because I know I talk too much sometimes, but I think this is really pretty important. The core academic skills comments that are on pages 31 and 32, that we have no, basically it's saying there's no feedback loop. We completely agree. I'm the chair of that committee, and the committee had already addressed our concerns to Bill. And he'd asked us to come up with a plan, for reinvigorating core academic skills and finding ways to make sure that we are assessing using that data and moving forward. So we did come up with a plan that we thought was a reasonable one. He asked us to table it until the new person started. And I met with Paul this morning. He had very different ideas from what we had. So I think we're kind of back at square one, and we're going to have to meet with him. And I guess he's going to maybe guide us a bit. But I thought that was a really fair criticism. It's one we were already aware of, and a lack of funding and frankly, energy on the part of the college is why I think we're in this spot. And that has no flaw on anyone. There's just a lot going on, but we need to reinvigorate the core academic skills, and we need to work on a feedback loop, which is something that Bill was working on or supporting us in working on. And then, he left, and it's heartbreaking and hard and depressing, but in any case, it's important. And I'm happy to talk about it in more depth as people want to. It's something that should be on our radar, and it matters. Scott, I saw your question. Scott asked, should we revive the course design process? Well, the course design process never went away. What's happened is that it's been 10 years since core academic skills was first invented or created and brought to the college. There was a lot of faculty buy-in. I think there's still a general feeling that it's an effective project, but there hasn't been funding for this in 7 years. So a lot of people teaching these classes, they inherited them with the designation, but they did not perhaps benefit from the coaching and the work that we were doing. So it's a really good program, but one that has really lacked structure, funding, and the support that a program like this would need. And so kind of therein lies the flaw, right? New people come in, teach these classes, we hire a new DCE, and we have an interesting and not ineffective assessment way of working with CASC, where they're sent out using the statewide designation for the year. It's not a waste, but we're compared to people who are teaching 300 and 400 level classes. So our results look lower than they should, because a 1 or a 2 actually represents that you're teaching a freshman or a sophomore. So if we get all 1s, or we actually do better than that, usually we get 2s, that looks bad next to state data where we are being compared to 3 and 4 year students, and that's not our goal. So there's just kind of inherently a lot of flaws, and because the data doesn't guide us, because we're compared to people who have students in junior and senior year, it's sort of we have information, but I don't think we have a great way to use it. Our focus has been for so long just to get people to teach these classes. And now I think we need to put our focus to making sure everyone is supported in teaching these classes and finding ways to assess these courses and these skills in a way that we can use the data to affect meaningful change for our students and to support our faculty. And I'll mute myself now too.
So Elle, you and I should connect, because I think in the spring we had talked about one of the challenges with the core academic skills and the assessment of them is that the way that Suzanne did it, it was sort of the development of the core academic skills was one committee, and then she was really using this committee for the assessment of the core academic skills. So maybe you and I should connect about whether or not that's still the best way to do it. And if it's not, then in my role as director of assessment, is there some other support that I can give you in developing a plan for assessing the core academic skills and making them part of our larger assessment project, so that we don't end up, because the core academic skills have fallen under this committee for so long with the Value Institute and all of that stuff, that I just want to make sure that we don't end up doing double assessment that's also not assessing the same thing and not answering the questions that we need to answer. Because I agree that the feedback about the core academic skills in standard 8 was pretty clear that we need to find a way to close the loop. But I think a big piece of that was because that the way that the core academic skills originally developed and then the way they have fallen out over the last 10 years have gone from having one person to just sort of being filtered between many, many people. So that's probably something we need to look at. Any other thoughts about standard 8? Well, so to that end, there were actually the two big things that stood out to me. So the core academic skills was definitely one of them, and we need to sort of come up with a plan with that that's a little bit more robust. One of the notes I made to myself, and Elle, we can kind of talk about this, and because I have no idea what you proposed or what you talked to Paul about this morning. But I'm actually wondering if something that looks a little bit closer to the program review process with like a clear template and a schedule, and this is when we're doing it, and we're trying to start to do a lot more of it in-house instead of this like, well, what is the state going to take? How many artifacts can we send? All of that kind of stuff. And to your point about like, and what other schools are we being compared to, that we might want to start to develop a process. But Scott, the one thing that I pulled out, and this kind of goes to like, what should our goals be for this committee for this year? Hitting 100% of programs having clearly stated student learning outcomes and having those on the website, I think is a really important thing that we need to be pursuing as a group. It's probably going to mean starting with like, why don't some of the programs have clearly stated student learning outcomes? Why do some of them have 33 of them and other people have 3? Like, so, you know, I made a note to myself about like, if some of them have 3 and some of them have 33, like, do we want to find a number that makes sense? Do we, you know, how do we want to offer support to like, is it the healthcare tech option? Is that the one that's like literally 33 student learning outcomes? And I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
It's
And
one of the health ones.
Psych has a lot too. And I know we've talked to Isabella about this a few times. I was actually, I just didn't have enough bandwidth to go through. She handed me all of them and said, if you can make sense of some of this, this is what I have to cover. If you can make sense of this, I'll accept anything. That was 2 years ago. I have never circled back to her handing me that paper. I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it with getting ready for the NECHE report. But I completely agree that it's low hanging fruit. It goes back to the one-on-ones that I was doing before. I can go back and do this again. Just need the Dean and Paul's support to say, this is what this is where you're being tasked for, and you telling me where I'm going, and that's what I'll do. I think that the big one that like we have done so much. I know that between Elle and I, the amount of course designs that we've covered since COVID and handheld faculty on designing courses, for the word elementary to be used in this final report was horrible to me. And this is where Melba is really, really needed on this committee. And I know that she can't be because she's got so many other things up in the air. But that word elementary was kind of like, are you kidding me? Because we have done so much. I don't know, Elle, how many courses did we redesign? 215 since the start of COVID. So that's something that we really need to start to consider, is the assessment process specifically designed for online. And there are hundreds of examples on how to do that. And there's an easier way to do it than what we've been doing so far. And we can talk about that at another meeting. But that was another area that we have so much out there, and people are so fresh on this, and they understand. They've learned. Majority of them have learned the intricacies and the functionality of Blackboard, that we could really go back to those faculty that have already done this and kind of circle back to them and help them design that next level within their courses. Again, comes back to funding.
Yeah, I am kind of curious to see what Paul thinks about all of this. I haven't met with him about any of it yet. But the one thing, when I read through this, one of the things that stood out to me was, because we have just had our site visit, I'm obviously not saying that we should not do assessment this year, but if there was ever going to be a time to look at what our real pain points are and where we really need to like develop new processes, and potentially at the cost of not doing as much assessment this year as we have the last 3 years, like this is probably the year. So to your point about like, you know, we did all of this stuff for online course design. Like, what did we learn from that? like what process should we implement? And if it's like not great this year, but we can have a process that works for us and is a lot less painful going forward, I'd almost rather see us develop clear processes that people actually follow, because I think we have some now and people just like, I mean, Scott, you know how it is. Like you offer all of these workshops and this is how it is. And here's some templates and I can help you with this thing, and people don't do it. And so I'd almost like for this committee to take a bigger picture view about assessment of like, why are we struggling so much to get people engaged in assessment in Northern Essex? And how can we do, like, what can we do about that so that the conversations we have in this committee aren't about like, well, this isn't working and like only 75% of people did this and we did all this work and nobody recognized it. And instead are like, you know, here's how we can provide feedback, here's ways we can grow so we can actually move forward. Because I just kind of feel like we're stuck in a spot right now where we're just like trying to strong arm people into doing assessment and hoping for the best. And I'm wondering if we can like, I'm thinking specifically like of the E-Series and how much drama that was the last 2 years.
So I like today I had one workshop today. No one showed up. Typically, it's always the same people that show up. And Brian, I'm going to use Brian. Brian's program is one of the leading programs for assessment at the college. Brian shows up to these assessment workshops, and he doesn't need them. He's just there, but he knows the material. He knows how to do it. I need people that don't know it, don't understand it, that need that one-on-one coaching. It's Brian and I end up just having a chat because he already has that knowledge on how to do it. So that's where my frustration is I do 2 workshops a month and either no one shows up or it's the people that are already leading assessment at the college.
Yeah, I really think it comes down to accountability. And I don't know what we can do about that, but really in English, we have a portfolio system, but I cannot make anyone submit portfolios and I can't go into their classes. The union won't let me just take student work from their classes. So we're assessing the same 6 or 7 willing faculty every time. And it's the same people who are submitting the core academic skills work every time. So we really know, as the data showed, that the 6 faculty who do it every time, who are willing to share student samples and pull them from their class and hand them in, they're doing really well. So yay for me and 5 other people, but that's not who we need to assess anymore because they're the people who are doing everything. Not that we don't have room to grow. None of us had perfect scores every time, but we're getting the same thing. I mean, I think it's about accountability. I think we have a systematic flaw right now that we do all of these things and then there's no accountability. People get their payment as soon as they've designed their class, but there's no follow-up to see if these online classes were effective, if student learning took place. We paid an awful lot of money to put classes online, but we really don't know that people even kept the design. And I know I sound so negative and I really don't mean to, but I just think like, I feel like it's like this like constant thing, like we're just having the same people doing these assessment things every time. So we're assessing the same faculty and getting the same results. And we don't really know how effective some of the things we're doing are. It makes me sad.
Okay, so what I'm thinking in terms of goals for the year, right? Like one of them would really be to try to figure out like what our culture of assessment currently is and what our barriers are to better participation and having a stronger, whether it's sense of accountability or actual like framework for accountability, right? Would sort of be the big picture thing. And then a more concrete goal would really be working with the individual programs to make sure that everybody has their student learning outcomes. That seems like very low hanging fruit because I think people actually have them. I think people just didn't send them to us. Some people probably don't have them, but I know for sure, Scott, at least some of those programs must have student learning outcomes someplace.
True. In response to that, do we want as a committee to develop a survey that would be sent out to faculty, chairs, and coordinators to say, what are your barriers to assessment? What is the items that are hanging you up on this? Have a check all that apply type of survey, and then that gives us some feedback, maybe a way to approach it.
I don't know, I feel like a question for Sarah and Brian, right? Like, are faculty going to do that? And maybe for Elle too, but Elle, you've already outed yourself as a person who will answer said survey, so.
I can say it's not good news from where I sit. One of the reasons apparently that I got voted out as department chair was that my colleagues don't want to do assessment. And they felt like I was pushing it, and that if they could get rid of me, then they wouldn't have to do it. So I'm just kind of out of this whole game, to be honest with you. Like, and this was something I was enthusiastic about, but there's clearly no way forward for it in my department. So it's going to have to come from outside.
Brian,
Doubtful.
okay. Are you guys comfortable if Scott and I take a stab at putting together some things that we might be able to ask coordinators, and then we can look at them as a group?
I mean, I don't mind.
Jennifer, for your area, maybe they might be questions that end up being helpful for you as well, if you're trying to figure out how to even get assessment started in student affairs.
I certainly don't mind going into a business and professional studies division meeting and talking about the chairs and coordinators about the importance of doing the survey at the very least, and the process at the next. I think people need a process though. I think they need to look at something they can hold in the hand and go, this is how you do this. And I think that's what's missing. Too many people think it's a dart game. And whatever they hit, they do.
So that was in the NECHE stuff, but I also, as much as I love Bill, I think sometimes Bill's tendency to be like, let the faculty figure out how they wanted to do it, can be really challenging, because it's like, you know, it's like we've all been in that situation, right? Where you're given an assignment or something and it's like, I don't know, do it, whatever you want. And it's like, well, what? I want you to.
Well, I think the kind of the missing link there was he was assuming that people were on board with the general project of assessment, and then how they wanted to implement it would be up to them. And I think that's great. But the step that was missing is that not everybody ever got on board with assessment. And as long as they feel like it's not something I understand, I don't want to do it. And so if I think I can just find a way around doing it, I will. So, I mean, I think maybe it'll take something like having a captive audience. You know, I don't know if it's someone from this committee, you know, coming to a department meeting and having a conversation with faculty that's just this kind of thing. Like, what are your ideas about assessment? When I say assessment, what comes to your mind? Like, because you have to hear from those rank and file faculty as well, and not just the chair and coordinator, because clearly I was not in step with the rest of the faculty, and I didn't even know how far off we were.
That actually worked well. I remember when I first got brought on to do this, we're going back almost 5 years ago. Bill, it was just, if you guys all remember, Bill had taken that semester off and Judy Zubero had stepped in for him. And so he brought me in, and over the summer, then he took the semester off, and Judy and I had several meetings. We would meet once a week on who I was meeting with and what was specifically discussed. And initially, I was under the thought process of what you had already mentioned, with Bill saying, everybody's is bought into this. We just need a process. And Scott, you create the process. Perfect. I'll do that. I was about maybe 2 months into it, meeting with Judy every week. And Judy said, I want to know who's not on board, because we'll just find we'll find new chairs and coordinators for those departments. If you remember Judy, that Judy was very upfront with things. She never pulled a punch. And I loved it, but I was a faculty, coaching faculty. I didn't have teeth. I'm not a supervisor. I was somebody that was encouraging people to do it. And one group, one department, Judy had said, good luck with them. They're not going to do it. And I sat with the department and the chair, they invited adjuncts in, and everybody bought into it. It was an 1.5-hour meeting. We went over specific student learning outcomes. I said, we need to come up with these outcomes, and then we're going to narrow it down, and we're going to come up with at least 5 outcomes per course. You can suggest to your students that there's going to be 15, but at least 5 outcomes that the department agreed upon for each course, a minimum, something that is a baseline. And it worked out perfect. I use that exact model going from department to department, and it worked out. The problem is that there were certain departments that did not want me in, that didn't want to meet with me, didn't want to talk to me. And unfortunately, those are the ones that are falling under that 71 and 86% that don't have them. So
I was gonna, sorry, I don't know if I just spoke over someone. This kind of reminds me of like my early experience with getting people to buy into Navigate, especially faculty. And just like, I basically went on like, I called it a road show to all of the department meetings and the division meetings. And I really think if we're going to do a survey, doing it live, like in person, and have at the division meetings and have people with their phones, like doing it on their phones. So there's accountability to fill it out and allocated time where it's like clear from their dean or their department chair that this time is dedicated for them to fill out the survey would be really important. And then I also think having like maybe really good representation from some of those divisions or departments in this committee of the people. I know, Sarah, like you were saying, your department does not like assessment, and obviously you are technically representation, but you don't share in their opinion. So that might not be what we need. Like maybe we need to have some of those people who are less advocates of assessment on this group to try and help have those conversations where we're saying, like, Elle, you're sharing examples of when your assessment has worked. Like, what were the benefits of that? Why are we doing assessment other than meeting our accreditation goals? Like, what does it actually do for our students to change their experience and to change their outcomes when they graduate? And so whether we find champions within each department who are like, I hate to get political, but like politically accepted, and we have them talk about assessment things that they've done with their group and really like give them the tools to facilitate these conversations, I think that that could be possibly a success, or maybe just a different tact. I don't know how successful it would be, but that's how I had some success with Navigate, though STEM still doesn't use Navigate that much.
Audrey, I love your points. And I feel like to add on to that, because I think everything you've said is an effective strategy that we should be doing. I think also one of the things that's on our list to talk about today is assessment day. And I feel almost like if we had a process in place that we already had materials pulled from the fall, assessment day could be devoted to departments actually assessing something. So like, that's what I was going to suggest for the assessment anyway, is I think that when we finally just give people time and an objective for assessment day, and then we basically leave them alone but ask for a report from the department chair or coordinator, whoever's going to do it, I think we come up with really meaningful things. And I know for the, like, that's what I would love to see. That would be meaningful to us. And there could be like, a form where you say, what data did you come up with? How did you interpret this data? And then at the end, we could say, what are you going to do with this data? And what do you need from us to move it forward? Because the English department repeatedly has found we have people who are maybe not effectively teaching multiple source-based essays. So they might be doing one in English 102, but you're really supposed to be teaching 3, right? But they're not moving their students past the initial phase. So we know that. We already know that. We have 4 years of data to show us that, but we haven't been like able to. We need funding. We have 41 adjunct faculty. They don't just come hang out with us for fun. They have many other jobs. Their lives are hard. But if we pay them and feed them, we get a huge turnout. So we pay people on assessment day, right? Like, what if that was part of it? Like if they come, we'll pay. And then if there was money for follow-up, a 2-hour workshop where we share the best things people know that address that concern. But I feel like that's kind of where I'm seeing some of the problems. But Audrey, I love everything you suggested. I think it would be fantastic, especially if it's leading to a day we've already determined this is when you're doing this work. And we've already said, like you can pick the class and the skill you want to assess, but you're going to already have pulled the information from your fall semester. So when you go in that room, everyone's assessing these artifacts, and this is what you're going to, and I feel like a lot of times that I say things that seem like I just want to boss everyone, which I don't. I'm just speaking from experience. Like if it's too loosey-goosey, the conversation's still valuable, but it doesn't get us where we need to go.
Yeah, and we love to just talk about a plan to do something. And if we just say like, okay, let's just cut that part out and just do it. And then at least we have something to work with, and people have a tangible memory of, okay, it wasn't that bad. It's not like this big nebulous idea I've been avoiding that's scary because I've never done it, or I don't know what's expected of me. So I think that's a really awesome idea, but I have to jump off early. I am very invigorated. I hope that everyone has a great afternoon, and I'll see some of you on the strategic planning meeting in a few minutes. Bye, everyone.
So just to follow up about that point about assessment day, because it is on the agenda, I was actually just going to run by you guys what I was already thinking for assessment day, because I do think that we need to start using that day a little bit more strategically to get stuff done. So I'm actually thinking, given where we're at in the semester, that if we want to really start to create a survey or talk to people about their feelings about assessment, their understanding of assessment, what role it plays, maybe that is actually something we should be doing with everyone in assessment day, because all full-time faculty need to be there, and we can, you know, we can have adjuncts there as well. I like the idea of using the division meetings, but those are coming up pretty quickly. So if we can't get things together by then, you know, assessment day might be a place to do that. I also think assessment day could be a place where we can ask people specifically to look at their student learning outcomes and do that work that we know needs to be done, because that is a very tangible thing, right? You need to have them. Why do you have 33 of them? How can you pare them down? Sorry, I'm like also truncating all of this because we have about 30 seconds left. I do want to leave a solid chunk of assessment day to the different departments to work on their assessment plans, because that's what we have done in the past. And I anticipate that people are going to be expecting having a solid amount of the day to do some stuff together. But the other thing that I think we really need to talk about this assessment day is how we're going to start to include the equity imperative in our assessment work. So we haven't really talked about that yet in this meeting, but for me, that really needs to be one of the things that we focus on institutionally this year, is how we're looking at our assessment practices and using some of those tools many of us have now been given through Q and a couple of other places to really start to look at our policies and practices and documents for equity mindedness, and then really think about how going forward we're making sure that the things we are assessing and the ways in which we are assessing them at the institution are meeting our equity imperative. And so for assessment day, I'm actually hoping we can hold, you know, a significant portion of the time that we'll use as a whole group to really start to unpack that. So just so you guys kind of know, I think that we really need to start doing that work. You're feel free to disagree with me, but I like we can't not have that conversation on assessment day.
That was the other major piece that people objected to, that I was pushing on in the department, is they didn't want to engage with the equity stuff. It made them nervous. It made them really scared. And they just elected to bow out. So it was kind of the twofold, like assessment and equity, they go together, and there's kind of similar resistance to both pieces, at least in my area.
And I think that there's going to be, Sarah, I mean, I think one of the things I want to talk about on assessment day is sort of like, how do we start to unpack the assumption that assessment is objective? Because no matter what, it's not, it never is. And so how do we start to get people, you know, you don't have to change everything that you do, but right, can you just, even if we can get people to start to recognize that assessment is not an objective activity, and then I think we can move forward as a, you know, as a committee, as an institution, I don't know, as a people, whatever you want to put in there. But I do think that that work is going to be important this year. So I know that a lot of us have to go to the core strategic team. Does anybody have, I can send out notes about all this, and Scott recorded everything so he can send it out, but does anybody have anything else that we like need to talk about?
I just have a really quick question, and it probably won't interest anyone else, but I'm hoping someone here remembers. In my meeting with Paul this morning, he was very curious why we wait until 45 credits to assess our core academic skills. And like, for the life of me, I can't remember why we're doing
that. Value determine that. So, and that goes along with the whole thing about we could do it internally. There's zero reason for that. It was done so that it was more likely that the students had the same number of college credits as the students that they were being compared to at the four-year schools.
It was also, there was two parts to that. The value had set up the 42, and the multi-state collaboration, we decided to do the 36 right before Suzanne had retired. So, but those numbers are external. As Kirsten said, we can always determine, we could do 12 credits if people wanted to.
Okay, this is so helpful because that's actually what I thought. And I referenced it and I said, but you know what? It's been 10 years. Like some of these details are escaping me. It's like an institutional rule that I couldn't remember. Why do we do this? Like I knew we didn't just arbitrarily pick it, but I just couldn't remember. So thank you. That's helpful. And then just one last question. Does anybody know what we're doing on professional day?
No.
No idea if we'll have time to work in departments. I'm just wondering for my own department, and this group knows a lot.
So my understanding is that Noemi is going to post Kim's position and we will have a new director of professional development at some point. So whether or not that person will be here in time to determine what we're doing on professional day in March or not is like.
Oh, right. Okay. I had them reversed. I was thinking professional day was this semester and assessment was next semester.
Oh, no, assessment day is in October. And yes,
Right,
the
right,
departments will definitely have time to work together. Professional day is not until March, so I have no idea what's going to happen.
I just reversed them. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right,
So-
I know we all have to run.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. This is a lot. I will be posting this in the portal within the next couple hours. I appreciate everybody coming on.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.